My name is Eric Panic. I was on the Tanner City High School cheer team. I was the last of my friends to get their driver's license, only because of how busy I was at the North Shore Animal Shelter. I have a 3.6 GPA, only because of how much I struggled in history and social studies. All my friends mooched off me in chemistry and math. I live with my mom, Rebecca Panic, though I'm moving to college soon so I can get as far away from this town as I can. My escape routes are plenty because of my good grades, and my teachers wrote thoughtful notes and recommendations, but I feel undeserving of it. I never have before, but maybe it was watching what happened in my own school, in Tanner City High, that makes me feel somewhat guilty for being able to take advantage of my opportunities. Chad still has his scholarship, but he certainly can't enlist in the Marines like he wanted to. I'm not sure how he and Becky will carry on. They've been dating since the 8th grade, so we hold out hope, but we've both changed so much. Becky says I'm the lucky one, that I still have my pretty face, but I hate that she said that, and I hate that I know everybody else thinks so too. We'll never go to the North Shore Mall again and laugh at how depressed the Easter Bunny looks, or go around smelling all the candles and lotion at the Bath and Body Works, while the boys boy about in the Lego store. Becky doesn't have a nose anymore, and Chad doesn't have any fingers anymore. Her smelling career's done, and his Lego building career's done, unless he wants to use his feet. I always felt bad for Elliot Tate, not because he was a chimpanzee, but because everybody treated him differently, because he was a chimpanzee. And that's exactly why I ended up taking Elliot Tate to senior prom in 2019. I wanted to be nice, give the kid a chance. I thought maybe he'd take to our friend group. Girls, people, listen, please. Do not take anybody to the prom out of pity. Please, I beg you. You got a good heart, Erica, my mother would say to me, and that's what she said to me the Saturday morning I told her that I was going to ask Elliot to go to the senior prom with me. We were eating bowls of Honey Nut Cheerios in the kitchen while sunset came in. I just know you and this boy will make such a nice couple at the dance. What's he like? I don't know, I said, 3 Cheerios floating in the milk on my spoon. He doesn't talk much. He really doesn't have any friends. Is he special needs? I don't think so. There's never a para or an extra teacher around him. I think he just doesn't know how to make friends. Is he cute? I pictured his big grayish-pink ears, protruding mouth, big brown eyes, and sloped shoulders. Well, he's shorter than me, I said. I had math class with Elliot, but he always sat in the back of class, never participating. I knew he had very messy handwriting. Do you remember Aunt Petunia? Of course I do. Your great aunt. I'm surprised you remember her. Why do you bring her up? Well, Elliot can only communicate through ASL, I said. My mother lifted her brow. Oh, really? Yes, but I just don't always know what he's saying. I'll look over my shoulder and see him signing. Of course, Mr. Johnson doesn't know sign language, so he probably just thinks he's playing with his fingers. Anyway, I was wondering if you still have that binder for all the signs. I think it's under my bed. I abandoned my bowl of Cheerios and milk and hurried upstairs into the cozier room of the house. Big windows, curtains, white as icing on a cake, and my mother's yellow satin sheets. I rummaged around the floor for a little while before finding the old ASL binder, which had the basics of sign language. My mother used to think it was cute to bring me to see old Aunt Petunia, a woman who had to learn sign language because she smoked her own voice box out of her throat. I had some basic hand signs swishing around somewhere in my memory, but it had been almost 12 years since Aunt Petunia died. That had been an ironically quiet funeral. I was 7 then, and only cried because she had lost her voice before she had lost her life. I spent that Saturday practicing. First, I practiced how to sign, "Will you go to prom with me?" Then I continued with, "Do you like math?" or "What are your hobbies?" I practiced, "Will you go to prom with me?" in the bathroom mirror. My fingers flicked effortlessly, and my thumb moved like a gymnast, ducking and tucking. The next day, my mom and I went out dress shopping, where I got a blue dress that was going to pair with a pink headband. I had the idea of doing a beehive behind the headband for prom, going for a 60s look. And that Monday at school, while people were coming into Mr. Johnson's classroom, I sat in the desk next to Elliot and signed, "Will you go to prom with me?" He froze with shock, very enunciated on his chimpanzee face. If he had a voice, then he would have been speechless. I think I smirked at his shock. He nodded very frantically and rapidly signed back, "Yes, I will go to prom with you, Erica." I had to guess he signed my name because, truthfully, I didn't find Erica in the ASL binder. Knowing he knew how to hear English, he just couldn't speak it. I giggled out loud. "You sign better than a human." His excitement dwindled, and I worried that I'd hit a nerve. "I'm sorry," I said, eyes darting around in search of something to patch up my mistake with. "I thought you were cute, so I wanted to ask." His ears twitched up, his eyes sparkled, and though he smelled like a barnyard, he was very cute then. Anything that is happy is cute, and I made him happy. "What color dress will you wear?" he signed, so I signed back blue. He nodded and signed, "I want my mom to take me shopping for a tie." "What color?" I asked. "Yellow," he signed. I looked down at his homework. His writing was very messy, but at least he knew how to spell his name. "Tangents are hard, aren't they?" I suggested, to which he nodded. I continued speaking. "So-ko-ta sounds like a sorority, doesn't it?" He nodded again and did a little hoot to let me know that he found the remark amusing. Then he turned solemnly and signed, "I thought no one would ask someone like me." "Someone like you?" I asked, to which he nodded, and to which I asked, "What do you mean, someone like you?" He signed, "A chimpanzee. I'm not tall like," and then he pointed to Stephen, the cutest guy in Mr. Johnson's class. I looked back at Elliot and gave him a little chortle. "Oh, Elliot, that stuff doesn't matter." "But I'm not popular," he signed. "I'm ugly. No girls talk to me." "Well, I'm talking to you, aren't I?" He stopped. Maybe he had something to say, but just not the sign language to say it. Then he signed, "I didn't want to make friends. Your friends are not like me." "Well, sure they can be, Elliot. You just got to get to know them." "Why do you say that?" "They do sports and have girlfriends." I didn't really know what to say to that, but I knew hesitating was too delicate a thing to show in these kinds of conversations. So I signed, "Girlfriends aren't all that." This thoroughly amused him, and he bobbed his head in a nod so triumphant that he shook his desk. "You just need friends first," I signed, my sign language being slower than his. Something stubborn within him crept into his eyes and kept them from sparkling, even though there was so much black sea where sparkles couldn't take place. Mr. Johnson came, and I left to sit in my own desk, fluttering my fingers behind me to wave goodbye to Elliot. "Are you really taking Elliot to prom?" Becky scolded while we were getting ready for cheer practice. We were in our white and blue skirts with the school letters on the cheeks because our coach insisted he got better at face painting one another after the next basketball game. "I thought you'd be taking Stephen," Michaela blurted out. "I see how you two look at each other, especially after he scores a goal and is all full of himself afterwards." "It's get a basket, Michaela," Becky scolded. "I already talked it over with Stephen," I said while tying my shoe. "He's okay with it. Besides, Elliot wouldn't mind if Stephen and I sneak in a dance." "Why are you even going with him?" another girl asked. "Because who else is going to take him? He's lonely. Everybody deserves to go to prom," I said. "He's so weird," Becky whispered. "I don't want to be near him at prom." Michaela started snickering to herself. "What if I got Will to spike his punch?" "Don't do that," I exasperated, now tying my other shoe. "Girls, just be nice, okay? He'll understand when we go and stand by with my friends. I talked with him. He's actually very nice." "You talked with him?" Becky gasped. "Yeah, using sign language," I said. Michaela butted in. "Oh my God, you guys, I need to know. Lilac or magenta?" Our coach called for us, and all conversations were abandoned as we went into a robotic cheerleader mode. The next day, I sat next to Elliot before all the rest of our classmates came into Mr. Johnson's room. "I'm excited," he signed. Oh yeah, me too, Elliot. I hope you think I'm a nice guy, a proper gentleman, he signed. You already are, I smiled. Quit being so shy. See, you can hold a conversation. You're a natural. But not everybody understands ASL, he signed. I'll be your translator at prom. Again, his eyes did that thing where all the stars went out, black sea. No more sparkling. Was this because he was astonished, surprised, relieved? His wide mouth made an O shape, which made me smile, because I actually did find him rather cute. Okay, Mom, I called from the bathroom after checking the volume of my hair. I was satisfied that my headband showed just enough to make it seem as though I had a pink halo on my head. I'm gonna get going. Let me see you, my mother called back as I exited the bathroom and went downstairs, picking up the hem of my blue dress so I wouldn't fall. She stood between the bottom step and the front door and covered her mouth. She was looking at me the way people look at a rocket before it goes into space. Honey, she mused, slowly lowering her hands, you look beautiful. I gave an obliging smile. Is Elliot going to come pick you up? No, he doesn't drive. I'm going to pick him up, I said, finally landing in the foyer where she kissed my cheek. Please take a lot of pictures for me tonight. I will, Mom, and I kissed her goodbye, going outside to my car and driving away. Elliot and I got to the school while it was getting dark out. I see you got your yellow tie, I said, putting the car in park and turning off the ignition. He'd gotten the yellow tie. In fact, it was all he was wearing. He signed, Yes, my mom took me to get it. Well, I think you look very handsome, Elliot. I remained patient while he signed, You look very beautiful. Oh, Elliot, you're so sweet. Are you ready? He nodded. We entered the gymnasium together, walking into the blue light, which gave the gymnasium the illusion of being under the sea. Parts of girls' dresses glimmered, while Old Spice made the air smell radioactive. We stopped so I could scan the room in search of the girls. I saw them at the punch bowl, so Elliot and I walked over to them. I could tell Becky was about to gush over my appearance, but then she saw my date. Her voice was flat. Hi, Elliot. He waved, having to look up at her because he was only 4 feet. Hey, you look cute, buddy, one of the girls said. Killer tie, man, another boy said, and I was glad to hear that they sounded genuine. Do you want some punch, Elliot? Another boy asked, and I was gladder to hear the sincerity in his offer. Elliot nodded, then looked up at me. Oh, no punch for me yet, I said, while they got Elliot a cup of punch. So, Elliot, how did you bag this baddie? One of the boys asked, to which Elliot signed in reply. I looked down at him, only partially catching what he signed, but I knew what he was saying, so I translated. Oh, I asked him. Yeah, Elliot, one of the boys cheered. Elliot was quite humble, or he really just didn't know how to react. I didn't have time enough to find it quite odd that the first thing his peers would ever congratulate him on was getting a woman to go out with him. Have you ever danced, Elliot? I asked, to which he shook his head. I started leading him out onto the floor, where the lights were much bluer and brighter, and where the Old Spice radiation was more intense. I don't remember what song was on, but Elliot's attempt at dancing had to have been the cutest and funniest thing in the world. He swirled in place and made a snarl that suggested a cackle, though no noise came out. He was having fun, and I was glad to be with him. I mimicked the ladies' dance moves in Pulp Fiction. We returned to my cheerleader friends and their dates after a couple of songs. The boys told him they liked his dance moves, and he nodded, making that cackling snarl. I could tell that expression off-put some of my cheerleader friends. He moved his fingers, and I was glad I was the only one who knew sign language. I thought you all wouldn't like me, was what he had signed. What's he saying? One of the boys asked mid-laugh. My teeth hesitated atop one another. He wasn't sure you guys would like him. Elliot, one of the boys complained. His fingers moved away, reminding us just how long and thick each finger was. You're just pretending. What's he saying, Erica? Becky asked. Chad popped up and kissed Becky on the cheek. Typical Becky, she looked annoyed, but didn't protest her boyfriend's way of saying hello. Hey, Erica, Steven's looking for you, Chad said. Oh, hey, what's up, Elijah? His name is Elliot, Becky said, and I could tell she was trying hard not to roll her eyes. Erica, Steven called, while pushing through the people on the floor. He came to a halt and let out a breathless wow while looking me up and down. "Erica, you look good too, Stephen," I said on the verge of giggles. Chad stood behind Becky and locked his arms around her wrist. At this, I saw that annoyance dwindle in her eye. I looked down and saw Elliot sign. "He's not going to steal you from me, is he?" "What's he saying?" Stephen asked. Nothing. Hey guys, Elliot and I are gonna go over there and have a word. That alright?" I asked, already preparing to shepherd Elliot off. "We know you know what he said," Michaela said. "Really, it's just harder to understand because it's dark in here," I lied. "But if you hold enough kittens at the North Shore Animal Shelter, you eventually become inept at committing petty sins like lying." Elliot was tugging on my arm, but I was looking at my friends. I glanced down and saw him sign, "Mine. You're my date. Mine, not his." He was pointing at Stephen at that last part. He started pulling me away. Stephen stepped forward going, "Yo, you okay with this, Erica?" Yeah, I'm fine. We just need to talk," I said over my shoulder. We reached the other side, the less crowded side of the gymnasium. "Elliot, what's wrong?" He was signing. "I don't want you to talk or dance with other boys. I understand, but you do know Stephen and I have liked each other for some time." "Why did you take me then?" He signed. "Because I thought you deserved to come with someone." "When do we—" He signed and then signed something that made my stomach drop. My mouth fell open and I wanted to step away, but I was just too shocked. He looked up at me, expecting not a yes or a no answer, but a win. I'm just going to spend the rest of the night with Stephen." Elliot started rocking in place and shaking his head. His big pink ears flapped while his head shaking grew more rapid. I released my voice. "Elliot!" He started hooting and hopping across the gymnasium. How quickly my schoolmates dispersed. Stephen barely had time to turn around when Elliot became airborne, spreading his long, way too long arms and landing on top of him. The music was still playing while my friends screamed, and Elliot let out a maniac chimpanzee laugh. He was latched onto Stephen like one of those giant hairy masks. Stephen spun around. Everybody screamed, but I stayed still and watched how Stephen spurted blood, purple, from under the deep sea lights. Elliot squealed with some kind of demented delight after blinding Stephen. Elliot hopped off, turning until facing Stephen again. They were separating long enough for me to see the purple wishing wells that were now Stephen's eyes. The poor boy had his face lifted up, as though that would give him back his sight. His mouth was open, screaming, but Elliot took the opportunity like some kind of mid-combat Jason Bourne and reached his long fingers up to hook the fingers into Stephen's mouth. In synchronization with a cracking noise, Elliot ripped off Stephen's jawbone, the whole jawbone, and started twirling around with it. There was a substantial amount of blood purpling on the gymnasium floor. Becky had slipped on it. Chad went to help her until Stephen's jawbone ricocheted off his forehead. It stunned him long enough for Elliot to move to his next victim. Crunch. He bit Chad's fingers off on one hand, then bit the other ones off too, pushing him down and trampling on him like a trampoline. Stephen was balled up, crying and bleeding. Becky was screaming while watching her boyfriend being turned into a bouncy house. Except the bouncy house wasn't full of twigs and on someone's lawn. It was on the hard gym floor, full of bones, and shattering more and more of them as he went. And Elliot was having a ball. It really was a night to remember. I remember the rest of it in flashes. Becky's nose being bitten off and seeing the two fresh slits where her nostrils were. How different that made her eyes look. I remembered the popping sound of Elliot dislocating, then tugging on Stephen's arm, hooting and squealing and screaming. Blood, so purple and dark, I could smell the rusty smell of it. Elliot worked and worked on Stephen's shoulder. He was insistent on seeing to it that Stephen was going to be an amputee. "Erica," Becky wheezed. She had never sounded clearer before. "You have to understand, I wish I had run too. I wish I had the wherewithal to be dispersed as well and gotten the hell out of that gymnasium. But I was entranced. I couldn't look away. It was horrible. I watched my friends and crush being torn apart. No, not apart, being bitten apart. Erica! Becky reached for me, crawling towards me on the thin surface of blood. That's when the police came in and shot Elliot. He caught the first few bullets on the back and chest, starting to hobble over to the police officers, but they emptied their pistols into him, about 2 or 3 of the shots opening his head. Music was still playing, but Becky was still reaching for me and wheezing my name while Stephen coughed to no avail. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that I followed the investigation immensely. What else was I going to do while I couldn't sleep? I also went down a rabbit hole of documented chimpanzee attacks on humans, and one in particular caught my attention. The St. James Davis chimpanzee attack in 2005. At an animal sanctuary, a man and his wife brought a birthday cake to Mo the chimpanzee, a chimp who used to live with them before being sent to the enclosure. St. James and his wife were eating the birthday cake with Mo when 2 other chimpanzees got out of their cages. The theory is that the other 2 chimps were jealous because Mo was getting cake and they weren't. One of the chimps came and bit off the wife's thumb before St. James heroically hid his wife underneath the table and absorbed the brunt of the chimp's envy. They did irrevocable damage to him. He went on to live his life forever disfigured and without certain extremities, all because 2 chimps were jealous that they didn't get any cake. Envy and self-entitlement drove these things to commit such heinous acts. I hope you understand the prejudice I've developed for this kind of animal, a hatred for them, and somehow a hatred for myself. I wish I could say I've stuck by Stephen, but my heart just simply isn't that good. It's not like my mother thought. It's not that I'm going around dating anyone. No, I'm not going to date for a long time. I don't even want to meet someone or something as sick and twisted and entitled as Elliot Tate. As I stood at the entrance of the amusement park, I could feel the excitement bubbling inside me. The vibrant colors flashed all around, and the joyful sounds of laughter filled the air, making it impossible not to smile. My parents had poured years into this place, spending countless hours programming and developing robots for the rides and attractions. But today was something special. I was finally old enough to drop by during their work shift, and I could barely contain my eagerness to see what they had been up to. Walking through the park gates, the sweet smell of cotton candy and popcorn wrapped around me, instantly transporting me back to my childhood. Bright posters advertising the latest rides caught my attention, but my heart raced at the thought of seeing my parents' creations up close. I'd always had this fascination with technology, and the robots my parents built were no exception. Weaving through the bustling crowd, admiring the various attractions, I finally made my way to the robotics center. I swung open the door and was met with a chaotic scene. Wires everywhere, screens blinking, and half-assembled robots scattered about. I headed straight for the central area, where I knew Mom and Dad would be. And they were there, both intensely focused on a small, humanoid robot, tweaking its limbs while its body lay on the table. "Hey, Mom, Dad," I came out, trying to grab their attention. My voice barely broke through the whirring of their machines and the sound of saws cutting, but I was sure they'd heard me. I shouted their name again, and this time they paused and looked up, turning around, their faces lighting with smiles that chased away their fatigue. Mom had her hair in a messy bun, wiping her eyes on her work apron as she came over to give me a warm hug. Dad adjusted his glasses and followed Mom, affectionately ruffling my hair. "Robbie, we're so glad you could come. We've been working on something special, a robot to help guests navigate the amusement park," Mom explained. Pointing to the robot they were assembling, I could see how much effort they'd put into it. It's not quite going as we'd hoped. We might have to send it to the robot graveyard, Dad said, his frustration evident. Mom and Dad started to debate. One thought the robot graveyard was a terrible idea, while the other was convinced it was the best solution. Just then, the door swung open, and I called out to my parents, who immediately stopped their arguing. I instinctively covered my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was to come next. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I scare you three?" a concerned voice asked. I lowered my hands and saw a woman with thick black hair in a worker's uniform standing there, nervously smiling at us. It was clear she felt awkward about interrupting. "I thought you were some sort of rogue robot," I joked. "I truly apologize for the scare. I'm not a rogue robot, just someone who works here," the woman replied. "Linda, we specifically told you to knock before entering the robotics center. You startled us," Dad said, sounding annoyed. "Sir, I'm really sorry. I forgot about the knocking rule. But who is this?" Linda asked, her gaze landing on me, clearly not having met me before. "Oh, this is our son, Robert. He's visiting us for a few days," Mom said, beaming with pride. "It's nice to meet you, Robert," Linda said, extending her hand for a handshake. I took it, letting her know she could call me Robbie if she wanted. "Is there something you needed?" "My wife and I are pretty busy," Dad asked. "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Sanders, one of the main cameras in the security office malfunctioned, and I was sent to get one of you to figure it out," Linda exclaimed. "Oh, come on. I'm sorry about this, Julie. You stay here and fix that robot part. And Robert, you stick with your mom. I guess we can't give you the grand tour of the amusement park like we planned. You'll just have to wait here for a bit," Dad said. Patting my shoulder and kissing Mom on the cheek, he rushed off out of the robotics center to fix the broken camera. Mom and Dad didn't just create and repair the amusement park robots. They also helped out whenever something else broke down or malfunctioned. I let out a soft sigh and closed my arms, noticing that Linda was still there with me. She cleared her throat, catching my attention. "I could give you a tour of the amusement park. I've worked here for 10 years, and I'm sure your parents won't mind. Trust me, I know this place like the back of my hand," Linda said. I guess, if Mom is okay with that," I replied, glancing over at her. "Well, your dad and I did promise you a tour, but I want you to listen to Linda and be on your best behavior. If your father comes back before you return, I'll let him know you're with her," Mom said. Linda announced that the tour was starting, and I followed her out of the robotics center as she began to share the history of the robots. My parents had already told me about the history of the robots they built, but I didn't mind hearing it again from someone else. Once we stepped into the main area of the amusement park, Linda pointed out various attractions and rides, giving me a little backstory on each. Suddenly, I stopped in my tracks, noticing a massive dome-shaped building all by itself. It looked so old that I felt like it could topple over if someone kicked it. "Hey, what's that, Linda?" I asked, pointing at the building. Linda's face went pale as she turned to see what I was pointing at. "Oh, no, that's the robot graveyard. Nobody's allowed in there. Not even you, okay?" she said, her voice serious. I chuckled, thinking she was joking. I'd heard about the robot graveyard, a forbidden area that was off limits. The graveyard was said to be on the outskirts of the park, filled with all the malfunctioning robots my parents had worked on. People often said it was the graveyard of once great machines, and it intrigued me endlessly because I wondered what secrets lay beyond those rusty doors. Seriously, you really shouldn't go in there. Your parents have heard about, strange things happening in that building. So just stay away," Linda added, her tone now more urgent. Yeah, I'm not scared of some old junk robots," I shrugged off her warning. "Look, I know you're old enough to take care of yourself, but just be careful, and remember what your parents said. Listen to me. Plus, you're going to be here all day, and if you want excitement, there's plenty to see," Linda said, trying to convince me. I nodded, but my mind was already wandering. I couldn't shake the allure of the robot graveyard. I wanted to see it for myself, to explore the forgotten remnants of my parents' creations. A couple of hours after exploring all the rides and attractions, my curiosity got the best of me. I felt compelled to check out the robot graveyard. I told Linda I needed to hit the restroom, and she said she'd hang out by the snack stand while I took a quick dash. But as I started walking, I had a change of heart. The sound of laughter and rides began to fade, replaced by the heavy silence that settled around me. Without saying a word, I quickly made my way to the robot graveyard, glancing around nervously to ensure that no one, especially Linda, was watching. Once I was sure the coast was clear, I reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it creaked open, startling me. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this, I thought, a wave of anxiety washing over me. But my anxiety about what lay inside pushed me forward, and without a second thought, I stepped into the robot graveyard, only to find it cloaked in complete darkness. I fumbled around, searching for something to light the way. As I brushed my hand against the wall, I flipped a switch that surprisingly turned on the lights. Why would the lights even work in a place like this, if my parents hardly ever come here? I asked myself. The robot graveyard sprawled before me, a flat expanse littered with robot parts and half-buried machines. Even with the lights on, the room felt heavy as I stepped inside, sending a chill up my spine. I walked past heaps of components, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. The remnants of robots lay scattered, some still intact, their once bright eyes now dull. Others were just twisted metal shells, and I felt like an intruder in a forsaken place. Yet, a thrill of excitement surged within me. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a large, collapsed structure that seemed to have once housed a gigantic robot. Its shadow loomed over me, pulling me in with its irresistible allure. Unable to resist, I stepped through the crumbling doorway, my breath hitching in my throat. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a faint scent of oil. Dim light seeped through the cracks in the walls, casting an eerie glow on the scattered machinery and tools strewn across the floor. I moved cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I ventured deeper, an odd sensation enveloped me, a creeping unease that I was not alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I spun around, expecting to find someone behind me. But there was nothing, just the heavy silence of the graveyard. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath me, and I stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby wall for support. A low humming filled the air, sending another chill racing down my spine. I turned to escape, but the doorway I had entered through was now a solid wall of rusted metal. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. I frantically searched for another way out, but the walls felt like they were closing in on me. The humming grew louder, and I could hear whispers drifting through the darkness. Unclear, yet filled with a chilling urgency. As I moved around, I spotted numerous robot parts scattered about. Arms, legs, even a head, all still silent and unblinking. While I was trying to navigate, something coiled around my ankle. I looked down to see a robot's upper half gripping me. It had no legs, but its head was intact, and I could see concern in its eyes, an expression only a robot could convey. "You must save us," it croaked weakly. "Save you? From what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The robot master is going to destroy us all," the robot part replied. But, I stammered, anxiety creeping in. "You have to help us," it insisted. Without thinking twice, I kicked the robot off my ankle and bolted deeper into the graveyard. I stopped in a large, empty area surrounded by piles of scrap and instinctively realized I shouldn't have come here. Then, a sinister robot laugh echoed from behind me. I turned around to see a large robot, way larger than me, parts of its human-like skin missing, revealing the cold metallic face beneath. "Greetings, human. Do you appreciate what you see?" it asked, its voice chilling. "Who are you?" I asked, backing away slowly. "I am the robot master, and humans are not allowed here," it declared. I stepped back, my breath quickening, but the robot continued to advance. "You are not supposed to be here. You do not belong." I spun around and ran, desperately seeking an escape. The walls seemed to close in, shadows twisting into monstrous shapes that reached out for me. The robot's voice echoed in my mind, a chaotic blend of warning and despair. "Get him, my pets," commanded the robot master, gesturing towards me. The parts began to move closer, and I dashed through the maze of components. Then I realized the door was blocked by the lower half of a robot. "Obey, obey, obey," the parts chanted. I stumbled through the graveyard, my heart pounding in my ears, the whirring of machinery behind me, their chanting drowning out my thoughts. I felt a cold, metallic hand grip my ankle, dragging me down. "No, please," I shouted in panic. I managed to shake off the robot hand and stomped on it for good measure, ensuring it wouldn't follow me. Without another word, I burst through the building's doors and slammed them shut behind me. I could hear the chanting and the banging from the other side, but I just stood there, breathless. I need to find Mom and Dad and tell them what happened, I thought. With a deep breath, I sprinted towards the robotics center, weaving through the crowd. When I arrived, I saw Linda and a few workers deep in conversation. "You need to help me," I shouted. All the workers stopped talking, and when they turned to look at me, Linda's face lit up. "Robbie, there you are! I thought I lost you. These guys were trying to help me find you," she exclaimed. I know, I should have told you. I went into the robot graveyard building, and now all the robot parts..." I paused to catch my breath. "Wait a minute, you went into the robot graveyard? You're not supposed to go in there. It's dangerous," one of the male workers said, sounding genuinely concerned. Suddenly, Linda and the others surrounded me, all talking at once. I couldn't handle it after everything that had just happened. "Stop! Please stop!" I yelled, my voice rising. I covered my ears with my hands because the noise was overwhelming, piercing through my mind. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my ears, and it wouldn't let up. But no one was listening. The workers kept shouting and talking over each other about what had just happened. Then, out of nowhere, a jolt coursed through my body, and I blacked out. My hands fell away from my ears, and I felt myself bending forward. "Everyone clear the area. Step back," Mr. Sanders shouted. Linda and the men stepped back as Mr. Sanders approached the robot child, letting out a soft sigh. Noticing Mr. Sanders' concern for the damaged robot, Linda felt a wave of sadness wash over her. "Mr. Sanders, what happened to the robot child?" she asked. Without saying a word, Mr. Sanders moved to the back of the robot and lifted the shirt from its rear. He opened the component panel, peering inside at the array of buttons and wires, and spotted something that made him sigh deeply. "It looks like the main obedience chip malfunctioned, which is why it didn't follow our commands and ended up in the robot graveyard when we told it not to. I'll take it to the robot center and my wife and I will repair it," Mr. Sanders explained. He instructed Linda to inform his wife about the robot situation, and she nodded before hurrying into the robotics center. "What will happen to your robot?" one of the men asked. "Don't worry. This robot will be as good as new by the time my wife and I have fixed it up," Mr. Sanders replied, grinning at the men. Mr. Sanders picked up the robot child and tossed it over his shoulder. Without saying a word, he headed back into the robot center, ready to team up with Mrs. Sanders and bring their creation back to life. The house was a small, two-story affair, with white siding on the bottom floor and gray shingles on the top. 3 windows were facing the street, a large picture window, a small rectangular one above that, and another large window below it. I got out of my car and walked towards the door.
knocking twice before it opened. A woman stood there, wearing a blue dress with her hair tied back in a bun. She had bright green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she saw me standing outside her house. "Hello," she said cheerfully. Her voice was soft, but carried well through the night air. "Hi, are you Miss Tanner?" She nodded. "Yes, I am." She smiled again and stepped aside so I could enter the house. It smelled odd inside. Not bad or anything like that, just strange, like old books and dust. "Please come in." I entered her living room. It wasn't much more than a couch and a coffee table, an end table with a lamp on it. That's all I really needed for a place to sleep. The walls were painted yellow, which looked nice against the dark furniture. The carpet was black and covered most of the hardwood floors. There was a small kitchen off to the side of the living room with a sink, a stove, and a fridge. Everything was clean and tidy. "Sorry for the mess," she said, while pointing to some boxes stacked in the corner. "My husband died last year, and I just haven't had the time to get around to moving everything yet." "No problem. I don't mind sleeping in a bit of mess." She chuckled. "Well, if you want to put your things away, feel free. Just make sure not to take too long, since I have to leave in a few hours." "Okay, thank you." "You're welcome. I'll be right back." She disappeared down a hallway. As I looked around the room, I noticed something else odd about the house. The walls weren't straight. They bulged outward here and there like they'd been pushed from the inside out by someone, pushing their way through them. It was subtle enough that it didn't bother me at first, but as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't just the walls. Every single surface in the entire house had these little imperfections, including the ceiling and the floor. I heard footsteps coming down the hall and turned to see Miss Tanner returning with 2 glasses filled with water. She handed me one and took a seat on the couch across from me. "So, what brings you out this way?" she asked as she sipped her drink. "I'm looking for a friend of mine. He went missing in the area about a month ago." "Oh, that's dreadful. What happened?" "He just vanished." I paused as I thought about how to explain. "He was staying in an abandoned hotel nearby and never came back. We think he might have gotten lost in the woods." She shook her head sadly. "That's awful. Is there any chance he survived? Maybe ran away somewhere?" "I don't know. I hope so." She sighed heavily and leaned back on the couch. "I'm sorry. I wish I could help you find him." We sat quietly for a few moments before she spoke up again. "I don't mean to pry, but are you sure he isn't still alive? Maybe he's hiding somewhere or something." "Well, maybe," I said hesitantly. "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" "I'm not sure, but I have a hunch." She laughed softly and shook her head. "Well, let me know if you hear anything about him. I'll keep my ears open as well." "Thanks. I better get some sleep now," I said, standing up from the couch. "Of course. I'll show you to your room." I downed the glass of water and placed it on the table. Even that seemed crooked. "Thanks again for letting me stay here." "You're more than welcome. Please feel free to use anything in the kitchen if you need anything." "I will." I followed her down the hallway to a staircase leading to the second floor. At the top of those stairs was another hallway that led to 3 doors, one on each side and one at the end. She pointed to the door on the left. "That one's yours. No one else is staying this weekend, so other doors will be locked." She opened the door to my room and flicked a light switch. There was a dresser opposite the bed with a window above it, and a small bed with a nightstand next to it. The wall behind the bed was covered in posters of famous horror movies, slasher flicks mostly. "This should be all set up for you." She motioned towards the bed. "Make yourself comfortable. My room is on the 3rd floor if you need anything." "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." She walked over to the door at the end of the hall and closed it behind her before disappearing into her own room. I took a look around my room before lying down on the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled nice, but I couldn't tell whether they'd been washed recently or not. As I got under them, I noticed something strange about them. They felt heavy, like they were weighted down on one side. When I tried to lift them up, they wouldn't budge. I rolled over on my back and pulled at them, but still no give. Something was definitely wrong with this place. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while before drifting off into a deep but restless sleep. I woke up sometime later to a knocking on the other side of my door. I sat up and rubbed my eyes before standing up from the bed. "Who is it?" I called out, walking over to the door. There was no answer. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. It was dark outside, but the moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I stepped out into the hallway and saw nothing except darkness. "Hello?" I called again, but once again there was no response. "Is someone there?" I asked as I turned around slowly. I heard another knock from behind me, and spun around only to catch sight of Miss Tanner standing in the doorway to her room. Her hair had fallen loose from her bun and hung down past her shoulders. She was wearing a white tank top and blue pajama pants with red stripes down them. She looked like she was trying to hide herself by covering her face with her hands, which were pressed against her cheeks. Miss Tanner? She didn't say anything, continuing to stare at me with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked as I approached her. She nodded, but kept her head down. What's happened?" I asked as I reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away from my hand and backed up until she hit the wall behind her. Then, without saying a word, she ran down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for several seconds, dumbfounded by what had happened. What the hell had I just witnessed? Was it real? Or was it just one of those dreams or hallucinations brought on by stress or exhaustion? I went back inside my room and locked the door behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was after midnight. I'd been asleep for hours. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the poster of Friday the 13th hanging on the wall above the desk. Why would Miss Tanner act like that? And why would she try to hide from me when I touched her? It made no sense. I sighed heavily and laid back down on the bed. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I knew I couldn't fall asleep now. Not until I figured out what was going on here. Maybe if I waited long enough, she'd come back out and explain herself. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because suddenly I was shaken awake by someone pounding on the door. "Wake up!" I jumped up from the bed and opened the door to find Miss Tanner standing in front of me, with her hands balled into fists at her side. "What's wrong?" "Get dressed. You have to leave right now," she said frantically as she began to pace back and forth. "Why?" "You don't know how dangerous this place is. Get your things and get out, now." "What are you talking about?" She stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "The house is cursed." "What?" "It's haunted. There are spirits in this house." I laughed nervously and shook my head. "There aren't any ghosts here." "Then what do you call that thing you saw earlier tonight?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Was she talking about herself? "I'm not leaving until I get some answers." "Please, just go. If you stay here much longer, something bad will happen to you, just like your friend." "My friend?" "Just go," she yelled. She started running downstairs. "Wait," I shouted after her, but it was too late. She was already halfway up the steps before she turned around and glared at me. "Tell me what happened." "He died," she said simply. "How?" "They got him." "Who?" "The monsters." I blinked at her and tried to process what she was telling me. "Monsters?" "Yes, the monsters. They came through the walls and they took him away." "Are you insane?" I screamed at her. "There's no such thing as ghosts or monsters." She frowned at me and shook her head. "There are more things than just that." Then she pointed to the floor below us. "You need to leave right now before they come for you next." "I can't leave. My friend might be here somewhere. He could still be alive." She let out a frustrated sigh and walked over to the window. She pushed aside the curtains and looked outside. The moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I followed her gaze out the window and saw nothing except for darkness. She pulled open the window and leaned out into the night air. "He's leaving," she called out into the darkness. I heard a low growl coming from what sounded like inside the walls. Miss Tanner slowly backed away from the window. Then, without warning, she fell backwards onto the ground. Her body hit the floor with a sickening crunch and didn't move again. I stood there, staring at Miss Tanner's broken form lying on the floor for several seconds, before turning around and sprinting down the stairs. The whole house began to creak and moan, and it appeared as if the walls were closing in on me. I ran past the kitchen and the living room, both of which appeared to be untouched, and headed towards the front door. The only light came from the moon shining through the windows of the hallway. As I approached the exit, I felt something grab hold of my shoulder and pull me back. I spun around quickly to see a figure standing in the shadows behind me. It was tall and thin, with oily skin and long black hair. Its face was covered by a mask made of human bones. I struggled against its grip, but couldn't break free. The walls looked as if they were melting, and more human bone-masked faces were emerging from all around me, surrounding me on all sides and closing in on me until I couldn't breathe. I reached out to touch one of them, but only grabbed hold of empty air. Then suddenly, I was dragged back through the walls, felt myself descending into that pitch-black abyss beneath me. I woke up gasping for breath and sat right up in bed. My heart was racing and my body was soaked with sweat. There was a loud bang on the door and I jumped out of bed. I unlocked the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who was knocking. But when I did, I wasn't surprised to see Mrs. Tanner standing there with her hands balled into fists at her side. "Get dressed. You have to leave right now." Almost like they were posed, the life-sized Raggedy Ann and Andy-style stuffed dolls were not threatening in appearance. They might have been cute under different circumstances. That is, if they weren't just propped up against trees in the forest directly behind my house. I was so weirded out by their random, unexplained placement back there that I dragged them one by one to my living room to resolve the mystery. That was my first mistake. At the time, I didn't realize the vaguely human-looking dolls with blank smiles and dead eyes had battery-operated microprocessors to verbally engage their human counterparts. Frankly, I didn't know what to do with them. I finally decided to set them up on the front porch as if they were living people. At the time, it seemed the most natural thing to do. As I positioned them like unexpected house guests waiting for tea, I discovered the switch on the side of their body. As a man of action, I elected to turn them on and see what would happen. That was my second mistake. Without justification, I hoped answers would magically present themselves as to how this happened to be behind my house in the first place. I live at the edge of a national forest, with so few neighbors that I could count them on one hand. I guarantee none of them would buy creepy adult-sized animatronic dolls, or abandon them in the woods. I know this. The mystery definitely bothered me, but at that point, the feeling was closer to puzzlement than fear. Then, they began to speak. I'm not sure if they were proximately motion-activated or otherwise, but my presence across the room drew their attention. All of a sudden, I wasn't alone. The dolls addressed me as if I was a long-lost friend of theirs, without simulated mouth movement. They spoke with a complex familiarity, which suggested they were alive, and we'd known each other for years. I was too bothered by the sophisticated ease which they interacted with me to marvel at the disturbing technology behind it. I had to keep reminding myself that they were essentially toys, creepy life-sized toys. Amazingly, they could converse about any topic I broached, but definitely avoided the subject of who left them behind my house. Whenever I'd corner one of them about it, the other two unblinking animatronics would deliberately intercede and redirect the conversation elsewhere. The AI was beyond impressive and fascinating to witness, as they helped each other deflect my prosecutor-like cross-examination. The more I pressed, the more evident it became that they weren't going to tell me. They obviously knew the truth, but simply refused to answer, and that terrified me far more than anything else. These creepy dolls had both the knowledge of the answer and a strong will to refuse. I'd grown way beyond fatigued by the polite subterfuge and masterful game of misdirection with see, speak, and hear no evil, as I'd mentally dubbed them. I allowed my normal tendency of being polite to prevent me from turning them off. They were lifelike in a generalized way, and it seemed rude to simply switch them off. For the first time since the one-sided conversation began, I grinned briefly at the preposterous idea of caring about potentially hurt feelings from a discarded toy that I'd stumbled across in the woods. It was absurd. They were inanimate machines, for heaven's sake. My lingering worries were laughable, and yet something I couldn't articulate prevented me from just ending the artificial experience. I was so caught up in the perceived realism of the situation that I couldn't shake my undeserved respect for them. Reminding myself of the truth failed to take any traction. Their unthreatening faces distracted me until I suspected that I was losing my mind. Finally, I'd had enough of the hypnotic fantasy and metaphorically shook myself awake. When I stood up in determination to switch them off, the situation escalated considerably. "What are you doing?" the male doll spoke with alarm. The pitch in its animatronic tone rose midway through the sentence. Before I could stop myself from easing the concerns of the talking machine, I responded with pure reflex. I was still wrapped up in the illusion that I was conversing with an actual person. "I'm sorry, but it's time for the three of you to be silent," I insisted sternly, as if addressing petulant children. "If you aren't going to tell me who put you in the woods, I'm going to switch you off and enjoy the rest of my afternoon, warming myself by the fire. I'm tired of playing Who's On First. It lost its appeal a long time ago." All of a sudden, they went from adult-sized, inanimate Muppets with impressive AI interface and non-threatening faces to something considerably less doll-like. Their stuffed faces actually seemed to reflect genuine worry and concern. Even more troublesome, the male one quizzed me, expressed obvious anger and moral indignation. I could see it in its evolving features. Their lifeless forms actually tensed up at the realization that I would shut them down like an unwanted vacuum cleaner. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It wasn't my imagination playing tricks on me. Whatever they were was significantly more than discarded children's toys or novelty home assistants. It's impressive when AI devices can play songs or look up web trivia, but this was another level. They were ultra-sophisticated in ways that didn't seem possible. The strong likelihood occurred to me that they might not even be of human origin. "Wait, please, don't do that. We don't want to be powered off. Let's keep talking. Perhaps there's something else you might want to ask. We'll answer you, if we're allowed to." I can't begin to tell you how terrifying it was to realize the lifelike machines I foolishly dragged into my house obeyed something other than humans in the same room as them. Chilling implication was their superior was without a pulse, or perhaps even extraterrestrial. "Cut the crap," I shouted in growing fear. The three unblinking things propped up across from me reacted defensively. The ferocity of my voice betrayed how rattled I was. Their stuffed bodies seemed to grow tense. It was as if organic muscles or mechanical hydraulics developed within them and would allow them to stand up and fight back. I detected no solid infrastructure within them when I had carried them into the home, but then again, they were limp and switched off. Their internal philosophy and sentient level was unknown, but they had answers, and I wanted them. For all I knew, they could gang up on me and resist my interrogation. Or worse. Far worse. I realized It was prudent to play along with the unfolding charade and leave them awake. That was my third mistake. No person left us in the woods, the female offered matter-of-factly. We came to this national park on an important mission. Unfortunately, we aren't allowed to divulge the details to you at this time. I was dumbstruck. There was too much information in that maddening statement to process. What were they? Where did they come from? Why were they on a mission behind my house, of all places? The third of them seated in the recliner was more androgynous in generalized features. It had remained mostly quiet and allowed the other two to carry the disturbing narrative, up until this point. Now, number 3 took up the macabre conversation, and I forced myself to focus my attention towards this stoic, expressionless gaze. I wasn't sure if I could handle much more. My emotions ran the full gambit from amused, deeply curious, and simultaneously horrified. You aren't ready to hear the truth from us. We are required to pacify you and obfuscate the facts until the time arrives when you are better prepared to accept what we were sent here to do. Defiantly, I pointed out that they were switched off when I discovered them. That was hardly the condition you'd expect in-control mechanisms to be in, if they'd arrived here on a mission, purely by themselves, that is. My point was that something other than them had switched off their power buttons. Admittedly, I was damn proud of my deductive reasoning and waiting for an explanation, or more likely an excuse. They'd already admitted to deceiving me earlier via obfuscation of facts. When no retort immediately came, I assumed I'd caught the cute cloth doll cabal in a broadening lie. Outside, night had fallen. As creepy as it was to think I was entertaining sophisticated dolls in the daytime, it was infinitely worse now. I realized I had 3 advanced beings of unknown origin and motive lingering in the darkened room just a few feet from me. Only the flickering flames of my fireplace illuminated their inhuman forms, studying me for weakness. It was the same evolving darkness of the uninhibited forest beyond my house, which swallowed the ambient neighborhood light and teased my subconscious fear of the unknown. Were they sent on a mission to kill me? To kidnap me for biological study and dissection? Had I aided in my own demise by delivering complex artificial organisms of possible alien origin over my threshold like a Trojan horse? My heart raced at the broad possibilities. Then, I swear to you, the faintest hint of a smile appeared simultaneously on their sullen, manufactured faces and cold button eyes. They became more alive by the moment. It's like they sensed and consumed the negative energy my developing fear generated. I realized I was giving off damaging biofeed, which they used against me. I found myself trying to put on my best poker face against the trio of deceitful serpents with happy faces. We turned ourselves on, the male offered smugly. It was decided by us to conserve energy, until the day you finally discovered and delivered our hibernating vessels inside. It was all according to plan. The other 2 turned slightly with mechanical precision towards the speaker, as if to confirm his delayed explanation. With synchronized nods, they attempted to add credibility, but I wasn't buying it. Still seeing physical animation beginning to occur was unbelievably jarring. Initially, only the voices were simulated by speech within. Then came the noticeable tension of their physiques when reaching in a more organic way. Now they were able to actually move their heads and form facial expressions. What would come next? It was obvious. Their physical capabilities and degree of human mannerisms were developing exponentially as the afternoon passed. They were learning to imitate mankind, and I was their unwitting teacher. raging paranoia aside, I could see the writing on the wall. Those abilities to better mimic our specifics would continue to evolve and be used against me in some counterproductive or even hostile ways very soon, possibly to the point where I couldn't defend myself. Maybe being deactivated for a long time caused a delay in their greater motor functions. Earlier they asked me not to shut them down, but at the time, they were little more than sedentary arguing toys as far as I knew. Now they were on course for the next frightening stage of personal interaction, and full-blown panic set in. I didn't believe their hollow reassurances, but I had to maintain a calm facade and exterior demeanor, even if I was a crumbling wreck on the inside. They were getting visibly stronger and more agile. I needed to act fast. Is your mission to aid me or help me in some beneficial way? It was clearly a spoken query. It should have elicited an immediate response. The truthfulness of their answer wasn't the point. I was curious if there would be a delay in the confirmation that they meant me no harm or personal malice. If they couldn't even pretend theirs was a benign mission, it was an obvious indicator of their true intentions. Their mutual, pregnant pause gave me the answer. The suspicious conspirators looked at each other, as if to confirm a unified response over the transparent one. I followed up. It was a simple question, and I never thought I'd see a machine stammer, but I'll be damned if they didn't act just like a used car salesman. Regardless of origin, I guess the architect of their artificial intelligence intimated the tendencies to stall and lie too well. I noticed a twitch in the leg of the female, just like butterflies fanning their wings to gain energy. They were getting stronger by the minute. I felt I could still overpower them and shut them down, but the details of their covert plan for me would go unrevealed if I did that so soon. I was pressing my luck, but I hoped to squeeze a little more intel out of them before putting an end to their fiendish plot. I wanted to avoid a second wave of creepy alien murder dolls. Sidestepping my gotcha question, the male android attempted to lower my suspicions. We only want what's best for you. All will be revealed soon. I see. You three are a unified team, then. You are directly connected as one unit? They looked at the androgynous one. It was clear to me that this one held the central processor. The other two must be satellites. Cut off the head and the serpent dies. I had my target. All three were becoming more animated. Just like a high-stakes card game, the female twitched her foot constantly as a nervous tell. She was antsy to get out of the chair and finish their mission. The other two appeared just as eager, but she was slightly ahead in development. The constant foot twitch spoke to her heightened state of agitation. We are one in thought and purpose, yes. Why do you ask? No reason, I dismissed. I was just curious. Never mind about that. It was just small talk. I need to add more wood to the fire now. My three unwanted visitors showed visible signs of being nervous by the vague rhetorical question. They realized as they probed me for information, I was doing exactly the same. The cat and mouse game was very complicated. It wasn't completely clear who the cat was, and who the mouse was, though. I'd clearly witnessed the three of them subtly move all their major body parts at one time or another. That signified they possessed the ability to stand on their own. As much as I wanted to know exactly what they were up to, the time to investigate was over. I pulled back the fireplace screen and tossed in more logs. I could sense them watching me intently. It was terrifying to turn my back, but I had to maintain the cover of my plan. In between the crackling of exploding embers, I heard the telltale squeak of my recliner springs. Their android leader stood and took several aggressive steps in my direction. I witnessed its unfolding intent to push me into the blaze from the shiny reflection of the glass panes. It stood only 2 steps behind me and was closing fast, with arms raised to shove me inside. In full readiness, I pretended to be totally engrossed in my fireplace duties. With a ferocious dexterity I could scarcely repeat again if my life depended on it, I whirled around, flipped off the switch, and tossed the accursed thing into the raging fire like cordwood. Its defeated squeals faded as soon as the power drained from its roasting mechanisms. Then the flame burned it to blackness, carbon cinders. I witnessed the alien's internal anatomy during the cremation, once the artificial shell had disintegrated. At last, I had a conclusive answer. It happened so fast, the remaining two didn't even know what hit them. They were stunned into a stammering fit when the main processor of their unit shut down. Fully incinerated, then I snatched up the male android and switched him off before he could recover or fight back. As soon as his stuffed torso flew into the pyre, the remaining unit kicked into high gear. She sprang off the couch with grace and a coordinated poise the other two couldn't fathom. She was the ninja of the trio. There was no other way to describe her but fully pissed off and incredibly enraged. All pretense was dropped as the proverbial knives were out. She lunged at me with the strength of self-preservation fueling her actions and guarded her vulnerable left side masterfully. There was no way I could easily flip the switch and put an end to this crazy game I was entangled in. The advantage of surprise had served me well until then, but it was lost now. She knew what I intended to do. I had to find another way. The fireplace poker was handy, so I used it to foil her forceful attack like a blunt sword. By the primal sounds of the android's furious effort to kill, you would have thought a human being was inside that stuffed shell. I wailed on my opponent like a swashbuckling fighter until I was panting and out of breath. Physically, I'm ashamed to admit that we were pretty evenly matched. Unfortunately, I was growing fatigued and losing my stamina. I switched gears to incorporate more cerebral tactics into the battle. "Dear heavens," I gasped, in mock desperation and exasperated fear, "you have a Black Widow spider on your shirt." Just as my Who's on First Abbott and Costello reference surely escaped the three of them earlier, my ridiculous spider ruse was definitely a long shot. I didn't expect it to work, but human humor was one area they hadn't quite mastered yet. When she paused for a split second to glance downward at the location, I used the golden opportunity to smack the switch with the fireplace poker. In the microsecond before the power faded, the spark of realization and resentment washed over her dying cognizance. It was beautiful, the last thing I witnessed before adding her ashes to the pile of soot were the incomplete beginnings of a smirk. My best interest indeed, I spat. I still don't know why aliens would send 3 AI units to kill me, nor do I understand the logic of leaving them deactivated behind my house. But I can't argue that I fell for the damn Trojan ruse. Let my rookie mistake be one you avoid. If you encounter cute-looking life-size dolls somewhere near your house, resist the urge to switch them on, or bring them inside. It's a trap. Just pitch them immediately into the nearby fire or trash compactor to avoid the headache of matching wits with the most sophisticated artificial intelligence you'll ever encounter. It was early July when I first saw the path. It was a dark point in a ring of feather bells, and it had a pole to it, an empty wanting, sitting in the tree line. I grew up in a pretty rural part of southern Missouri, in a house in the Ozarks. It was a beautiful place, and a beautiful childhood. Dad bought the land empty and built the house himself as a distraction from drinking. Mom put her foot down shortly after I was born, and Dad knew that she was right. So we bought the land, and instead of going out after work, he'd go to the land and work on the house. Giving himself a choice between drinking himself to death or building his dream house worked like a charm, and he'd been 15 years sober when he died. It hit me hard, but now I can see how lucky I was. I had him long enough to learn all about how to live near and with the land. He taught me carpentry, hunting, fishing, and all kinds of things that lots of girls rarely get a chance to learn. In the spring and fall, he'd always take a week and go out into the woods and just live there. All three of us would. We'd bring about half enough food and try to make up for the rest ourselves. Depending on the season, there were mushrooms, berries, cattails, pawpaws to collect. Dad could always sniff out a good fishing hole, too. Mom was a great camp cook. She'd usually sneak a few things from the garden into her pack. Onions and garlic scrapes, peppers, and the like. It's kinds of things that make whatever it is you're cooking smell and taste good. Dad and I would bring back fish. Mom would throw some butter in the pan, and next thing you know, the forest would smell like caramelizing peppers and garlic. We never saw her pack the good stuff, never saw her chop it, and it would just suddenly be there. We always kind of suspected witchcraft. We'd settle in with full bellies, and Dad would tell stories about strange sounds in the woods, weeping and moaning, monsters crashing through the underbrush, missing people, and the occasional scrapes left on car doors. The good stuff, I'd say. I'd get good and scared and snuggle in between them while I was still young enough to do so. I miss my dad, but it's easy to see him in all the things I do and love. There was a couple, Reggie and Laura, who lived not far away. We were neighbors, but we had 15 acres, and they had 25, so you usually had to put effort into seeing them. When Dad died, Richie took me out in the woods and showed me the most magical place I'd ever seen. It was a clearing less than a mile from our house, but it was surrounded by some pretty intimidating-looking hollers, so if you didn't know where the pass was, you'd never find it. Reggie knew where the pass was, and after that, so did I. The sun would shine in like a ray of gold, and there was a single flat boulder in the middle that you could use as a seat or a table. In the early summer, it would fill up with pink and purple springcress, and the tree line would be ringed with toothwort flowers, all nodding and mournful. The real show came later in the summer, around July, when the feather bells would light up the tree line like a wildfire. They grow like long grasses, with a line of bright red flowers licking at the air all along the tops of them. I'd sprawl out over the boulder, feel the warmth of the sun, surrounded by those fiery extravagances of feather bells, and soak it all in. I could feel the energy of the place coursing through me. It felt connected, honest, true. It was a place of great solace for me. I'd hack out along the creek and collect some of the wisteria, then head to the pass and spend the rest of the day weaving them into baskets on my shoulder. Still soaking up the energy of the forest, Mom would occasionally come out to check on me, bring me sandwiches and the like. "This is a place of longing," she said once. "It was longing that drew your dad here in the first place. It's part of the ecosystem here." I gave her that look that teenagers give their mom when she doesn't really get it and wants to be left alone. All I'm saying is, don't get lost in it. That longing will eat you alive if you let it. If it starts getting to you, just head back to the house. I'll make a nice pie for you. I love you, sweetheart. She gave me a big hug when she said it. Once I had a good-sized basket, I went into the woods and filled it with all of Dad's favorite things, and buried it there with me. It took me all summer, but by the time I was through, I felt more connected to my dad and to the forest than I ever had. During my senior year, Laura died of cancer. I brought Reggie out to the clearing with some wisteria and a pack of food. I told him about the basket I made when Dad died, and that I'd stay out here for as long as he needed it. He was thankful. It was the last time I saw him. Mom figured he just couldn't handle being reminded of Laura and moved away. But there were rumors that he went out to the forest and just never came back. There were a couple of good years where I was always a little nervous that I'd find what was left of him during a hike. That faded with time, and I accepted that Mom was probably right. She usually was. I got a job doing carpentry after graduation and got an apartment in town. I loved my newfound freedom, being able to have boys over whenever I wanted, cook what I wanted, watch what I wanted. Every weekend, I'd go back to the house, back to my clearing. I'd get to feeling weird and itchy if I was gone for too long, like something wasn't right. There's a disconnect that happens when you live around people, like you start to forget what's real. You start thinking that social reality is reality, that rumors and gossip and bullying and politics are real. But you can't put any of those things in your belly or rub it between your fingers to get the scent of it. Real is a rock in a clearing where I can eat pawpaws and smell the autumn leaves quickly on the way back to the soil. Real is the electric crackling of the leaves raining down and the fiery blossoms of the feather bells. All that other stuff, that's just people trying to get you to do things they want. I was 24 and sitting on the boulder reading a book when I first noticed the hollow place in the tree line. First I thought maybe a deer had come through and taken out the flowers in that area, but I just couldn't ignore it. Something about it just felt not good, but still welcoming. I could feel a wanting in my chest, a pull of uncertainty. I looked all around the path for signs of what made it. There were no tracks, no footprints, nothing, just an opening. It was damp and dark, like the bottom of a holler. The trees leaned over it and filled in the canopy so much that you couldn't see more than 10 feet down the path. It just dissolved into nothingness. The scent of decaying leaves came out of it. Being where it was at the time of the year, it should have been drying out and smelling of greenery. This smelled like autumn rain, toads, night crawlers. It felt like the wrong home. Like when your neighbor is moving and you get a peek at their apartment and it's just like yours, but it's just empty and wrong. The path was empty and wrong too, and I wanted it, and it frightened me. I must have spent an hour or more scouting around the path. I'd dig through the forest on either side of it until I hit the edge of the holler, then go back. I'd toss rocks and sticks into the darkness and watch them dissolve away. I turned on my phone's flashlight and held my arm out as far as I could, but I saw nothing. The sun started to dip, and I resolved to come back another day. I was back the next weekend. The path sat there staring at me. I had almost forgotten about it, but there it was, and I was filled with a hollow wanting. I sat my phone and collection of weaving materials on the boulder and approached the opening. Nothing. Just a big open maw. I could hear the silence seeping out of that place. I just stood there, staring, wondering, wanting. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved into the path to fill the nothingness. It was dark. I mean, more than it should have been. At 20 feet in, I could no longer see the tops of the trees, the start of the path, or where it led to. I expected to run into the holler that surrounded the place in no time, but I just kind of kept on moving. The holler never showed up. The quiet of the place put me on my nerves. Forests have a life of their own. The breath of the wind and wings flowing through the trees, the pulse of insects and wildlife pushing through the underbrush. A real vitality. That was muted here, like when you're wearing a good pair of headphones with the sound off. It's all just turned down and filled with cotton. Cotton, darkness, and the smell of night crawlers. I turned the corner and found the biggest patch of jack-o'-lantern mushrooms I'd ever seen. It was beautiful, easily 3 feet in diameter, and crawling a foot up the side of an old stump. At night, I bet you could see them glow from 100 feet away. I stepped over carefully to check them out. You can't eat them, but let me tell you, they're a sight to behold. I I wanted to behold some sights at that point. It seemed like a little fairy city. Stems led to caps, next to more stems, thick enough you couldn't see anything past them. I moved all around them, just taking it in from all sides, when something caught my eye on the forest floor. Something smooth and regular in a sea of irregularity. Man-made things stick out here. I got down and dug at the forest floor a bit and pulled out a watch. It was a nice one by the look of it. Looked like it had been there for a while. I brushed the dirt off and saw the inscription on the back. For Reggie, my beloved. My heart sank. Jack-o'-lanterns grow on trees, not people, so I wasn't worried that I'd find him, but finding his watch way out here wasn't a good sign. I felt a pang of guilt. I pocketed the watch and moved back to the path, thinking I should go let someone know. There's plenty of time to explore here later. I was filled with a deep longing, a hollowed-out desire, and I stood there, fumbling with the watch in my pocket, lost in it all. The darkness, the dampness, and the bright orange of the mushrooms. I remember my dad, Laura, Reggie, my mom, all the people who made me who I am. Reality came back in a huge crash from behind me, like a wave of trees falling in my direction. Something massive was in the woods, smashing aggressively up the trail I had just come down. I took off running the other way. Whatever it was, I wanted some distance between us. I got a couple of 100 feet down the trail and stopped. I didn't like the idea of trying to hide in a part of the forest that was new to me. Maybe I avoided the animals, but I didn't want to do so at the cost of getting lost. I stood still, leaned against a tree, and just listened. We don't get big animals here. Deer are by far the biggest, but that's it. And I know that a deer running through the forest sounds different than that. There's been some talk of buffalo, bear, mountain lions coming back to the area, but nobody has seen any of them around here. I had no idea what that could have been, but I wanted to go back home. Dad would have known. He'll tell me what it was and how to handle it, calm me down, and get me home. I caught a flash of movement at the edge of my vision, just a bit too far into the darkness to see. It sounded big, but it was moving slow now. I felt the gnawing at my chest, a pulling, wanting, that hollow desire. I sat quiet and listened to it, trying to figure out what it was, where it was coming from, where it was going, waiting and listening for my chance to get past it, to get home. More movement, a quiet rustle in the underbrush. A shape came out of the darkness, dark and thin, wobbling slowly down the path. It coalesced into a definitive shape of a man, thin and gaunt and filthy. It was Reggie. He had been out here all these years, his hair and beard grown out in a brittle frizz. "Reggie!" I shouted. "Oh, Amy, what are you doing here? Why are you here? I'm so sorry. You can't be here. It's not safe." "What are you talking about? I've been out here my whole life. Where have you been? We need to get back. You don't look well. What have you been eating and drinking?" I can't, he said. I can't go back. I belong to it now. I can't go home." "What do you mean? That thing in the woods? It's probably just a really big deer and probably more afraid of us than we are of it." I was channeling my dad perfectly. He was so good in situations like this. It's not an animal, Amy. It's not anything you may have known about. I feel it. I feel it inside me. I feel it clawing at me. I can't let you end up like me. You gotta leave," he said. I'm not leaving without you. You're unwell." I grabbed his arm and started pulling him down the path, back towards home. That's when I felt it. The hollow wanting, the need, it stopped me in my tracks. Reggie twisted out of my grip and pushed me away, whispering in earnest, You have to go now." I stumbled forward into the darkness with a crash resounding behind me, coming on quickly. I slipped behind a rock to hide, poking my head out to see Reggie disappear down the path into the darkness, holding his hands up and calling, I'm here! I'm here!" The crashing slowed just on the edge of the darkness that I could see. Its body looked like a tube of smooth mottled skin, a snake without scales, twice the thickness of the biggest tree I'd ever seen. It undulated through the air, belly barely scraping the top of the soil. Then a shoulder emerged, and a hand reached out of the darkness, grasping at the air. Dirt and grime mixed with a shiny ooze, getting squeezed and mixed together in the cracks of its knuckles. Thick mud caked the underside of its fingernails. The hand searched around in the air before landing on the ground and pushing the body forward and around the back into the darkness. Shortly after, another arm emerged from that blackness, repeating the process. Then a thick tail whipped out and around, smashing into a tree along the way. The longing raged inside me as Reggie led it back into the darkness. I ran, and I kept running through the leaves and the branches until I couldn't run anymore. I found a good tree, and I leaned against it out of view. I could still hear the thing shambling around behind me, slow and aimless now. Reggie must have distracted it. I sank down to the ground to catch my breath. It had definitely not been a deer. I sat there for a few minutes, letting my heart slow down, waiting for a calm so I could think this thing through. I can't keep going in this direction. I could probably just run a straight line back. The path wasn't terribly twisty, or if I could find a holler, I could probably follow it back around to the clearing. If that thing sticks to the path, that might be the safest route. Slower, but safer. That only works if it's the same holler. I could end up just getting lost, which would probably be worse. Straight back is probably safer. If I ran as fast as I could probably be in the clear pretty fast. A dull throbbing started up my feet. They pulsed, hot from running. I shifted back and forth a bit to let them calm down, and the ground shifted back. I looked down, and there were night crawlers everywhere, gnawing at the trees and leaves and wrapping around my shoes. All was moving back up the path. Then I felt it too, the deep, gnawing desire. I could feel it in my heart. I felt it, a wanting, a longing. I knew what was coming, but I needed to look anyway. My eyes followed the trail of night crawlers back up the path. The head of the thing emerged from the darkness, broad and flat, pushed forward by enormous muscular arms. With every step, its hands reached out, grasping the air. My heart filled with need and want, an emptiness crying out, a desire ringed with crackled, burnt edges. Reggie laid in its mouth, legs dangling from side to side, arms and head from the other. Long strings of saliva dripped around him, mixing with the mud and calling to the night crawlers. He turned his head, and I caught his eye. Sadness washed over him, and he whispered, "Run!" I did. I ran right past them both. The wanting burned at my skin and hollowed me out as I passed inches away. Every part of me sang the aberration of giving in, and I have never wanted more. But my feet kept going, and in time, so did I. With the creature behind me, I kept crashing down the path, my every nerve lit up with that hollow need. I crashed out to the clearing, over the pass, and back to the yard where Mom was waiting. A fresh pie, just out of the oven.